Welcome.
Welcome.
We are at the final episode of Season 2, The Art of Mental Health.
It's amazing. We managed to fit them in 10 episodes. Season 1,
That's
10
right.
episodes. It was entirely without our planning.
You are listening to Magenta FM, Season 2, The Art of Mental Health.
We will bring some lesser known and some downright strange approaches to consider and explore.
We'll draw from our own experiences with healing and from our work helping others, plus our research into little-known fields of inner development.
We'll share tools and practices that help us heal and put the power and agency to heal back in our own hands.
This podcast and YouTube show represents the opinions of Rachel and Louisa. The content here should not be taken as medical advice.
The content here is for informational purposes only. And because each person is so unique, please consult your healthcare professionals for any medical advice.
This season, we have explored mental health, some of the common struggles that people are experiencing around mental health, anxiety, depression, dysthymia, and we've talked about healing and our understanding and how we've healed and our unique approach to healing that we bring in the school. Mm-hmm. We want to wrap up today by talking a little bit more about our worldview, which underpins our approaches and the way that we understand healing, which really comes down to how we understand the human being.
Right. It all comes down to that.
That's right. So the first point we're going to make today, we're going to talk about the source of consciousness. What is the source of consciousness?
Yeah.
Then we're going to invite you to consider our anatomy of consciousness and how we think about it, and which includes the superconscious, the day-awake conscious, the subconscious, and we'll get into all of that. Then we're going to revisit the finished worlds, which is what we talked about in the last episode, but we're going to build on it a little bit. We're going to talk about how we heal, and we're going to close the episode by giving you a little bit of a peek into season 3.
Now, you might be sitting there thinking, ooh, this all sounds rather abstract, but I just stay with us. This is important stuff, and it might appear to be abstract, but we're going to try and bring it to you in a way that's not abstract, because this is really the heart of the matter. This is what this underpins everything that we talked about in season 2, and it also underpins everything that we talked about in season 1. It's kind of like season 1 happened, and people were like, "Oh, could you just keep going with relationships because it was really helpful?" And it's like, well, actually what we needed to do was reveal to you the tools and the concepts that were behind the things that we were bringing in season 1. And now in season 3, we're going to bring the tools and the concepts that lie behind season 2. So we're just getting deeper and deeper into, the meat of it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get a little deeper. So let's start by exploring the source of consciousness. Talk about
right.
Yep. Yeah.
Right before lunch. Yes. So why don't we start with a common assumption? And it's a very reasonable assumption. And that is that the source of consciousness is the brain. And we've invested an awful lot of time, energy, and effort into studying the brain as based on the assumption that it's the source of consciousness. And why not? It's a very reasonable assumption to make.
But there's also a lot of implications.
Yes, well, if you realize that this is an assumption that we're making and that it might not actually be true, or if you bring forward a different idea or a different picture of the source of consciousness, certain things open up. In fact, a great deal opens up that enables us to go deeper into the phenomena of consciousness, which we need to, because I think maybe we can all agree that the tools and practices that we currently have, and the healing modalities that we have in dealing with mental illness and healing from mental illness and mental health issues is inadequate. And the reason why I say this is because mental illness is on the rise. And that's my evidence for saying our approaches are inadequate.
Yeah.
We need a different understanding. in order to break through to what's really going on. I think a part of the evidence that we want to lay out in this episode is also that no one has ever found physical cause for mental illness like OCD and schizoid type, struggles and psychoses and neuroses. Like these things haven't been proven to be, for instance, lesions in the brain. It's not that people aren't looking for them and looking for this kind of thing, but...
Or that there are correlations.
Right, but just because there's a correlation... I mean, you can certainly see effect on the brain, and you can see effect in the firing of things and how we measure and look at the brain with all of our sophisticated machinery. You can see effect, but correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation. So we can't actually prove that there's cause there.
But if we're living with this assumption that consciousness is coming from the brain, then naturally our interventions are going to target the brain. Either through strategies to try to rewire the brain or through drugs. Or other types of interventions that are brain
physical
focused.
Yes, and it's not that there isn't some success or that they don't help, but we're not talking about a true healing. We're talking about management. We're talking about improvement. We're talking about symptomatic management, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're looking or that we know or that we have clarity about causes and going there with our interventions.
Yeah.
We think that we need to get to the cause because there's something to be discovered there which will guide us into our future. Collectively, as humanity, there's a secret to be found here. And this is what we want to kind of illustrate today.
Yeah. So let's consider and invite you, listeners, to consider with us that consciousness were not sourced in the brain.
Right. Instead, here's a picture I want to give you. Imagine that the brain is, instead of it being the source of our consciousness, is an instrument for our consciousness. So if you have a violin, the violin is this beautifully created, very finely honed and subtle, nuanced instrument built out of the laws of sound and beauty in sound. But it doesn't play itself. It doesn't play by itself. It plays with the consciousness of the violinist, obviously, right? So that's what we mean by the brain and indeed the whole body as it influences the brain is more like an instrument than it is like the violinist themselves. Why don't we find another example? Like imagine the organ for sight, the eye, not the I am, because we so often like talk about the eye. But what I mean is the actual organ of sight. Imagine that eye over eons of time has evolved into the organ of sight that it is today. Which came first, the organ of sight or the light? Which comes first? So in this particular analogy, I'd like to propose that the light comes first because the light the light forms the organ of the eye. The organ of the eye doesn't form and then create light. And similarly, the brain doesn't form and then create somehow consciousness. So the proposal here is that it's consciousness that is constantly present. Its phenomenology is over many eons of time forging the instrument. So the violin is constructed based on the laws of sound. The laws of sound were not created based on the way the violin was made, So these analogies are all to say the brain is this incredible organ, like the heart or the liver. It's not actually the source of the thing. The thing formed the brain, and the brain is perfectly attuned. It's almost like, I like to talk about the whole physical body because, from trauma research, we know that the body holds trauma, right? What does that mean? It holds how we internalize our experiences everywhere, not just in our brain, right? So maybe we could even think about the whole body as like the instrument for consciousness, or maybe it's like the praxis, or maybe it's like a magnifying glass. It's the focal point,
or or a mirror,
or a mirror.
Maybe the body is mirroring what is existing and hidden in the case of trauma, suppressed.
Right. The reason why I'm trying to give pictures and analogies for this idea is because because this idea changes everything about how we think about consciousness, what we think, what we believe, what we understand, the assumptions we draw, the nature of the subconscious with the realm of the shadow. Everything changes with this because
and how we intervene.
Yes, and how we intervene, what kinds of tools.
Yeah, what kinds do we do to try to heal?
Yeah.
And there is a big movement more on the fringes, but there is a movement to intervene in the body as a means to heal trauma.
Right.
To intervene in, a musculature that's storing trauma.
Right.
Like tight shoulders.
Yeah.
And we can certainly help our bodies, and we can certainly help ourselves and help the instrument of consciousness.
Yes.
So we don't disregard the fact that we are a material body and we have a material brain.
Right.
And we can assist our bodies at being healthier, and we can see when we are intervening in our body, like getting healthier, for instance, eating healthier, exercising, the effect that has on our consciousness.
Yes.
And there may be, similar things that people experience with trauma, intervening with their body, and then they feel some freedom from the trauma. And similarly, there may be injury to the body or the brain that affects the consciousness. So we're not saying that the brain doesn't matter.
Right.
Because if the brain were the instrument for consciousness and the brain suffered an injury, then you could see a distortion of consciousness as a result.
Right, which is not a distortion of consciousness itself. It's just a distortion or an injury in the vessel into which the consciousness is focused.
Yeah, and like you were saying, these interventions in the brain may be helpful, just as interventions in the body around trauma may be helpful. And we are interested in exploring more deeply what is the source.
Yes, we live in a time when the dominant worldview today is called materialism, and we study things from that worldview, which means all the theories about evolution, all the theories about the source of consciousness, all the theories about health and wellness and injury and disease and illness, all are encapsulated within that framework.
Yeah, so materialism as in what is matter is all that is real.
Yeah, what is physical, what you can measure, what you can count, and what you can weigh.
Yeah.
Now we know, of course, there's quantum physics and there's quantum
mechanics,
stuffs.
all kinds of things.
And we are already at the bleeding and the leading edges of science and research. There is a lot of people who are really challenging very vigorously the materialistic worldview, and that's fantastic. And a materialistic worldview has taken us really far and deep into an intellectual capacity that we bring to bear in science and scientific rigor and logic, right? It's just limited, and it's not enough to help explain complex realities of the living world and indeed our living inner life.
Yeah.
And nor is it adequate to help us understand consciousness. So we actually have to build on a materialistic worldview. We have to be able to expand our worldview, not be limited anymore by materialism, and to be able to include, for example, the spiritual nature of consciousness. Because if we don't, we're never really going to understand certain phenomena because they are of a spiritual nature, namely consciousness. And what I mean by that also is not just our thinking, but also our feeling, and also the source of our actions and the impulses behind our will.
Yeah.
These are things that have a spiritual nature, and they can't be weighed, measured, touched, smelt, anything. And so they can't be assessed from a materialistic worldview. So one more thing to say about this. So we have what has arisen in terms of now I'm not an evolutionary biologist, okay, and I'm not even pretending to be, but the idea that we have evolved out of the muck to become intellectual giants, and that we did that purely from a biological, physiological basis has never really sat very comfortably with me. What if we were to consider instead that there are spiritual impulses and structures and potentials that are constantly available to us that have helped to forge the incredible infinite wisdom of this physical body as an apparatus for consciousness? And looking out into the infinite wisdom of nature, this cannot be explained by chance, right? So if we consider that there's a spiritual nature to the formative forces behind the world and ourselves and our consciousness, then that just opens up for me a world of much more meaning.
And a lot of empowerment, because
Yes.
we are not just a product of chemistry and chance and
biology.
evolutionary biology and survival
Of the fittest.
because we are capable of morality, and we are capable of lots of things that are outside of chance and chemistry.
Exactly.
Hello, thank you for watching or listening to today's episode of Magenta FM. We want to take a moment and tell you that we have a lot of useful resources for you on our website at magenta.fm.
And actually, we want you to know that we're now regularly holding and hosting webinars. And in those webinars, we dive into some really juicy and challenging topics. We don't just do a bunch of downloading. We actually do exercises. We bring tools. We journal right there and then, and we do plenary, and of course, lots of Q&A. So you can go to our website at magenta.fm. You can sign up for the next available webinar, and we're holding those on a regular basis. So we hope to see you there.
And lastly, one of the best ways that you can support our show is by sharing it with friends or family
please.
who you think might find it helpful or interesting. So you can just pause the show right now, text your friend a link to magenta.fm/podcast, and there they can see all the episodes and listen to the most recent one or one that jumps out at them. And we really appreciate your support.
Thank you so much. So if this is all you can follow us so far, thank you for, listening to us to this point. The next question then is, what is the source of consciousness? What is this? How do we think about this, and why is this even important?
Yeah.
And so let's talk about then something of an anatomy. We're very fond of anatomy because it's really helpful to structure our understanding about things, to create some order in the chaos of overwhelming information. So what I would like to propose is what we're dealing with before it arrives to us as individuals. It is in a form that we're going to call the superconscious, because imagine that superconscious or superconsciousness is an activity. It's a verb. It hasn't come into any kind of form. It is wholly in potential, and it's there available to us. And so what happens when it comes into the vessel and into the magnifying glass or the focal point of our brain, our body, into us as a person, because our entire system, as I was saying before, is perfectly attuned to receive it, right? What comes in is this potential and this activity that we experience in living thinking, in our thinking. And then it becomes fixed into thought or thoughting. And so then we have this activity that goes from thinking into form, and then it's a finished product. It is the thought. It's the concept. It's the, so first of all, it might be a percept, like a perception, and then it comes into the concept. So first you have the perception, and then you form a concept about it. And
you have a perception of a bird flying through the sky, and then you have the concept of bird.
Yes.
Which is true.
Yes. And then, but as soon as you formed a concept around it, then it's fixed. And now we have a thought instead of a living activity.
Yes.
So then what happens is we think the same thought often enough, and it drops down into what you could say, into this finished, it has this finished quality to it, and it drops down into our subconscious. So this is another level of our consciousness. We've got superconscious, which is all activity and no form, all potential, but no concept. And then it comes into a finished nature, and then it drops, and then it becomes habitual, bird, tree. And then it just is a part of us. It, you could say it drops down into the subconscious. And this is the realm where Rachel and I have been so laboriously talking about, just in terms of the finished world. This is where the habitual part of our thoughting happens in our subconscious. And our word for it has been the shadow. But what we're really meaning is the subconscious, because the shadow dwells in where we're not awake.
Having the concept of bird or tree established within your subconscious as a reference point is not what we're talking about when we talk about the shadow.
Right. Right.
Because that's useful. It's useful for us to have concepts.
Mm-hmm.
But when the activity becomes thought.
Or locked into belief.
Yes.
Locked into associations, locked into belief. We form associative style pictures about something that is sort of chaotically mixed in with how we feel about it. Is it, antipathy and sympathy? And all of that becomes muddy and sort of falls down into our unconscious, where we no longer are aware of its activity in us. Mm-hmm. Or I should say, it's not really so much activity as it is habit. And if you're familiar with our podcast, addiction. So we become fixed in what we believe, we become fixed in the form, and we are no longer connected to the living activity of the superconscious, mm-hmm. which is normal, I mean, when did you last have a new thought? Our lives are all about concepts that we've already thought, that are already familiar to us. It's actually really difficult to tap into a super conscious kind of living activity of thinking. You have to train for that. Here's another example of what we mean by the difference between super conscious and, let's introduce a third kind of consciousness, day awake. The day awake consciousness that you and I are conversing about, that someone who's listening to this, you are in your day awake consciousness. And so one other way we can define, there's lots of ways to define the difference between superconscious and day awake conscious activities. But one easy example is a difference between ability and habit. So let's say, to use the analogy of the violin, you practice on the violin a piece of music and you now can play that piece of music. Well, it doesn't mean that you can play other pieces of music. So you've built into your habit the ability to play that piece. But what if you built into you built an ability to play any piece? Mm-hmm. So that's the difference between habit and ability. So capability is never formed or finished. Capability is an activity that you can apply at any moment because it's now a capability in you. Whereas a habit is formed and finished. So most of the drama of life happens in our day awake consciousness, except for when we're triggered, for example, when the subconscious arises up and hijacks us. And for instance, with, finished world style thoughting that have dropped down into our subconscious. So that kind of sounds pretty abstract.
Yeah.
So let me just summarize it again. When we're talking about the finished world, what we're really trying to describe is the habits that we've formed around what we believe, the associations that we have about things, about other people, about ourselves, this, what goes on in that stream of consciousness, of what we're telling ourselves that we're not really aware of. But our beliefs is really where it all kind of can land.
Yeah.
That is what you could call thought forms. So you marry that with your feelings, how you feel about those thought forms, and those feelings are the ones that we call self-feeling, meaning they're not generative, they're not healing, they're negative usually, they're self-contained, they're self-focused. Mm-hmm. So you have the combination of those habitual thought forms and those kind of style of feelings married together into what we call the finished world. And that's what drops down into the subconscious. So we have this beautiful potential in the superconscious, this lawful spiritual potential that comes always, raining down on us. And we take that and we do something with it. And if we do something like form an idea or form a concept about the world or about ourselves that is based on wound. People are they're so terrible. People are so stupid, based on shattering life experiences. Like we all do this. There's no judgment in this, but this is just a part of the phenomena that we need to observe in the soul.
Yeah.
The superconscious gets formed and fixed in these, what Georg Kuhlevent would call diseased ways, diseased states of finished thought forms and self-feeling that form together a finished world that is highly addictive in nature. This drops into the subconscious realm and festers there. It really is like a festering, because the moment that you're triggered with certain triggers, those particular thought forms are going to rise up and hijack you because you're not in the driver's seat.
Yeah. And it's very fixed. It's very rigid.
Yes.
It's you're no longer actually perceiving reality.
Right.
You're no longer, it's like, it would be like as if you were witnessing a grove of trees, and then you pass by a beautiful stream, but you can't even perceive that stream. You perceive that as like another tree. Like you're not seeing reality anymore.
Right.
So the perceptions, our capability for perception is so important because it helps us see the truth of the world.
Right.
But it becomes diseased or
Yes.
distorted by these finished world that basically allows us to not see reality any longer.
Yeah.
And we're just living out of this we're living our life out of this false reality.
Yes, exactly.
Thankfully, most of the time, it's not actually applying to, trees or objects. So we're able to like drive a car and navigate and not run into trees.
Right.
But
Right.
it affects us very deeply nonetheless, because there are the beliefs that we're holding about how the world works, about how we
our place in it
operate.
Yeah.
What's capable, what's possible.
Yeah. And so the day awake consciousness is our tool. We have this. And we can't access the superconscious just because we decide to. We can't access the subconscious because we want to see what's going on there. You just can't. Like, try and look into the darkness of your soul, and it will just slip away from direct observation. But our day awake present consciousness is the mediator between the subconscious and the superconscious. But we have to actually, and this is really what our work is about, is how do we connect to these two realms? Because we have to heal the shadow, heal the subconscious, and we have to learn how to strengthen our connection to the light, to the superconscious. This is what it's all about, folks. This is the work. And we have to do both at the same time because what is it that actually heals the diseases of consciousness? What actually heals mental illness? What helps us become healthier in our mental space, right? It's the light of our consciousness. It's the superconscious. So I'm going to propose, I'm sure I've said this before, it's the only thing that heals. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later on in this episode, not just us individually, but also all the damage that humanity is creating in the world. This is what's going to heal that. This is what's going to change things. And so I think the goal is that we practice making room for superconscious activity to be more available to us in our day awake consciousness, our daily consciousness, so that we're not constantly reverting back to what's stuck, habitual, and compulsive in us, so that we are more and more in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
So this is a big part of what we're trying to bring. One more thing to say about this.
Yeah.
The superconscious, just to be clear, is made of the substances that can heal and transform the subconscious finished world creations that we've created. So can we be any clearer? I mean, I don't know. Maybe it sounds really abstract, but I don't know how to put it more clearly.
Well, it's there in potential, but we have to choose it. And we have to do the work to strengthen our connection to it.
Yeah.
It's not like a light switch of I want to be tapped into the light now.
Right.
So I'm just going to turn on this light switch. And
here
we
I
are
am in the fourth dimension.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We have to work out of our own efforts to connect to that potential that is there.
Right.
To heal.
Yes. And so this is a message that we want to bring to the world, because in this place, we have freedom. And this is the freedom that the gods have given us. They hold a great deal about our reality that we're completely, usually unaware of. They hold They hold so much of the functioning of our physical bodies. We have no control over our digestive system. We have no control over our liver functioning, or even over our heart, brains, and skin. This is outside of our control. There are, we could say, mighty beings that are constantly creating the formative forces that give us life and that give us the potential to be conscious, right? Why are they doing that? Why? And I think the constant message is, okay, here you are, you have life, you have faculties that you've earned over millennia, with your capacity for the intellect, with your capacity to shape the world like little gods, and to be destroyers. What are you going to do with all this power? What are you going to do with this? You're free to decide. There's no gods who are telling us what to do anymore, right? We have grown up. We're like teenagers now. We want our independence, but we're not quite capable quite yet, because look what we're doing with our independence. We're being very destructive. But that's okay in a certain way. I mean, it's not okay, but I mean, it's okay in the sense that this is a part of what we must discover ourselves. Let's put it another way. This is like the dance between good and evil. Well, what is good and what is evil? Let's find out, because we're free to explore this. And what we're seeing in the world is that we are indeed reckoning with evil. And what we see in a materialistic worldview is an absence of moral, ethical considerations. I mean, they're there, of course. There's science of ethics and philosophy of ethics and these kinds of things. But we also have GMOs. We also have drugs that are coming out of pharmaceutical companies that are more and more and more dangerous, with less and less and less repercussions for those companies.
Yeah.
And we have the great poisoning of the environment, and the companies that produce these chemicals that are poisoning us can do so with impunity.
Yeah.
So we're really reckoning with good as well. You see what I'm saying? Like we are free, right? And so the question is, what are we going to do with that? You don't have to do your inner work. You don't have to listen to us and wrestle with these concepts and these ideas. You can switch off this podcast at any moment and go listen to someone else, maybe Joe Rogan, because he's really cool, or whatever. But the point is, there's the given and there's the not given. And the not given is what we are concerned with.
Yeah. And it's not natural feeling, and it's not instinctual feeling always to make the moral choice.
Right.
Own our mistakes.
Yeah.
To take responsibility for our own distorted reality.
Right.
And our own participation in the mess and the dramas of our life.
Of our time. Yes, and because we are the battleground. Mm-hmm. Our consciousness is the battleground of our time between good and evil, self-interest or sacrifice, or peace or war. Mm-hmm. We are the battleground. The battle is already raging.
Yeah.
And to what are you going to attend? Are you going to attend to distant authorities that are telling you what you should think and what you should feel and what you should do? Are you going to attend to the compulsive, finished world nature of your inner life and let that dictate how you're going to show up in the world?
Yeah. And what are we going to tolerate? Because it's easy, or it's convenient, or because
we're afraid.
Or it's what the majority of people are doing.
Right.
Even if there's a part of us that knows something is not good, how often do we tolerate things that we know in our deepest truth are not okay, are not good?
That's right. Yeah, and so, where's your moral fiber? I love the Harry Potter 4, where Harry gets points for moral fiber.
Oh, yeah.
I've always loved that. But that's it, that a part of the invitation, it really is an invitation, because there can't be an injunction, there can't be a demand if you're left free. Mm-hmm. But there's an invitation to choose the light, to choose to be a vessel for love instead of self-interest, right? And our world is just full of self-interest. Like the cutthroat world of business is total self-interest. Like, trickle-down economics, it wonderfully accrues to the common good. Yeah. Like, it obviously doesn't work.
Right.
And it doesn't.
Yeah.
And the enormous wealth transfer that's going on, and it has been going on, especially through the pandemic. There's nothing good about any of that. Mm-hmm. And it really is, so much of this are pictures of evil.
Yeah.
And I think, just to really try to drive the point home, the reason why this is possible is because we don't yet understand, in a kind of collective way, the power of the superconscious. We don't understand who we are and what we are, that we're spiritual beings having a physical experience, that our destiny or our potential is to consciously take up this work of forging a connection to our higher self, which is the potential or the possibility of a direct connection to the superconscious. Not so that we lose ourselves or lose our individuality, because that's, we have fought real hard for our individuality. Like, individuality is a part of the evolution of consciousness. We're all these individuals, but we're unique.
Yeah. So you're kind of speaking to this idea of, like, oh, just connect to the oneness.
Yeah, no.
And this, no, I'm saying this is what you're responding to
Exactly.
is like this idea of just,
Singularity.
connect to this oneness. Right.
No, I'm not. Yes, exactly. So I'm not saying that when you connect to the superconscious that you become a part of a singularity.
Yeah.
Because you've been evolving for I don't know how long, millions of years to be this singular individuality.
Yes.
Not a singularity.
Yeah.
So
with a singular purpose.
Yes.
And whether we fulfill our purpose, whether we step into what we, deep down in our heart feel like or sense that we're supposed to be doing, is up to us.
Right. And we are, all of us, a part of this great mythological battle.
Yeah.
And, there's tons of pictures in the Apocalypse from the Bible full of this. And, I realize that the Apocalypse is esoteric language. So you have to understand esoteric language in order to understand the pictures and the prophecy that's there. But just imagine if the Apocalypse is really actually written for our time and the times to come. It's not about the past that we've already lived through. It really is about our time in the future, because this is what we face. It's the great battle between good and evil, between love and whatever its opposite is. You know?
And it's within us too. We all know the temptation for greed or the temptation for being self-serving,
right?
Or the temptation for hate,
right? Or self-hate, or the temptation to not make the right choice, but to make the safe choice.
Yeah, to stay small.
Yeah, and safe, even though that doesn't work. I can tell you that now.
Yeah.
From experience. Yeah, so that maybe that's enough in terms of the soapbox about the invitation and maybe even the imperative, if we don't want to continue down this path that we're on of increasing societal chaos and increasing corruption and tyranny in our governments all over the world, and increasing pollution and poisoning of our planet and our bodies. Like, something's got to give.
Yeah.
So this is really where we want to go in this next season. And we're kind of tentatively, I don't know, do we want to call it the art of spiritual development?
That's what we are considering.
What
working title.
Yeah. If you have a better idea, let us know in the comments.
Okay, well, I think that is a good place for us to wrap it up, but we do want to do a really thorough summary of what we covered today, and just try to encapsulate it a little bit tighter for you listeners so that you can hopefully kind of walk away with the crux of what we are trying to share today.
Right.
So we started our conversation talking about the source of consciousness and asking this question of where does consciousness come from? What is the source of consciousness? There's a common assumption that it comes from the brain, and we can see, through history and through our, materialist age that we're in, how one could come to that conclusion. And we invite you to consider the possibility of, what if it is not coming from the brain, and that the brain is just an instrument. The brain and the body are an instrument for consciousness. What does that mean? What are the implications for that, if that were to be true? And then we talked about another idea of the anatomy of consciousness, including the superconscious as an activity, as a potential, like a light that is shining down on us all the time, but we have to choose to go against part of our nature to turn to that light, to access it. And over time, through growth and development, we can access more of it or more frequently.
And that it's the only force in the universe that truly heals, and not just on an individual level, but also on a societal level. And this is a part of why we're facing the chaos that we're facing, the great poisoning and the societal chaos and the breakdown of so many institutions and systems that we've had in place is because of the absence of this knowledge in our society about the source of our consciousness, about the higher self, and accessing that. It's time.
Yeah, because we have the subconscious.
Yes, and it's hijacking all of us.
That's right. And as individuals and collectively.
Yeah.
And it's very dark. And we have to find, we have to do very special excavating to even understand what's going on there.
Yeah.
To be able to shine a light and heal.
Yeah.
These fixed, rigid, finished worlds, finished beliefs that are living in our subconscious.
Yeah. And that finally there's more to talk about because we've been able to now introduce this concept of the superconscious, and that we're proposing it does not come from the brain, but it is of an entirely spiritual nature. So now we can talk about spiritual development, which is in a development because we're talking about things that are of a spiritual nature. And that's where the healing happens, because the disease is not necessarily in the body. Not to say that the injury to the apparatus, the physical body or the brain, doesn't have an impact, but it has an impact like a broken mirror has an impact, right? You're not going to get a clear picture if your apparatus is injured or damaged.
But the light, the superconscious, is not broken.
Right. It is a part of you and your potential that is never broken, that's never wounded, and that is regenerative in nature. And really, this is something that you get to know experientially. So we can give you all these concepts, and some of it may sound really abstract if you've never heard them before, and I totally get that. And I just want to assure you that as you get into these spaces of practice around healing the subconscious, connecting to the superconscious, you can begin to have experiences that help you integrate what all these concepts mean.
Yeah. And we have faced the subconscious, and it is dark.
Yeah.
And we have done our work, not in the sense that, we're done and we're on to the next level.
By any
we are
long
doing
shot.
our work.
Yeah.
We have done a lot of work. We're still doing a lot of work.
Yeah, and we will keep doing it until the day we die, but we're also helping others in our membership program. This is what we're doing. We're building the methods and the systems for how we do this work. Always understanding that the superconscious is what is healing.
And when you have that experience in yourself of the experience of healing, the experience
and the empowerment
of tapping into something, a part of you, this potential that was there that you were like, man, how did I not know that was there all along? If only, but this unwounded, unbroken, pure, loving,
potential,
just beautiful part of us.
True, full of truth and grace.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
when you have this experience on an individual level, you start to, it's easier to understand how this is what is happening collectively.
Yes, but you got to have it. You got to experience that and understand that yourself first before you're going to be able to have the eyes or the organs of perception to observe it phenomenologically on a collective scale at other scales.
Yeah.
One way to sum all of this up is when we do the work of getting to know these spiritual forces in us. We're participating in a very serious and very meaningful larger field of play that is going on. And so, this is why we say your healing is my healing, is your healing, is my healing, is the world's healing, is my healing, right?
Yeah.
It's all, your individual work is so important to me, because there's these larger fields of invisible activity that you might not be aware of that have huge repercussions in the world. The thoughts that you might think they're hermetically sealed, what you're thinking and what you're feeling, and you might be embarrassed that anyone would ever know what you're thinking and feeling, right? It's private, it's my little private world. But it's not hermetically sealed from the world. It has huge impact. And that's why we also say what's coming to you is coming from you.
I think that
about wraps it up.
Yeah. Visit our website. In the meantime, we are sending out some really exciting gifts this month.
Sign up right now while you're thinking of it.
Yeah.
There's free stuff.
Magenta.fm. And we will stay in touch with you there, and season 3 coming soon.
Yes, and let us know what you think, because we're putting out, we spent many hours preparing for this episode because it was hard to get it all organized and structured. But we'd love to know how this landed for you. Like, put it in the comments if you're looking at this on YouTube. If you're not, if you're listening to it on the podcast, head on over to YouTube or shoot us an email. Whatever works for you, just tell us how this landed for you, what was confusing, like what questions you have. If you hated it, we want to know. Just, let's have a dialogue.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.